We're back! Although we didn't really go anywhere. New season, new format, shorter, sharper, and more spicy. Tell us what you think.
You're listening to the Neuro, Spice and Life podcast.
I'm Freya, an alexithymic counsellor.
I'm Hannah, a sexologist and sensologist.
And together we're peeling back the unfair and unjust labels that hurt us and hold us back.
And this week we're talking about big feelings, big emotions, big expressions of too much.
So when we get told our feelings are too big and that we are too much, we learn from a pretty young age just to bottle them up, push them down, like chuck a chocolate bar or like a bottle of wine or, a shopping habit over the top of them, and just keep them all to ourselves because otherwise people are going to reject us.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is from such a young age as well. I mean, I remember being able to throw, not a lot, but, a couple of tantrums here and there if I could get away with it. But funnily enough, you can't do that when you're older.
Yeah, no, it's weird. It's like our responses are the same, right? Our needs are the same, but society's expectation around what's okay and what's not okay kind of shifts a bit around us, but we don't necessarily get the skills to sort of go about things differently. Yeah, it's a really, really tricky one. And a lot of the clients I work with really struggle with this, the big feelings and the big emotions. And, I can't let them out because, what if I'm seen as too much? And for me, pretty out there about it that I am an alexithymic counsellor, which means I have difficulty identifying and naming emotions and feelings and what's going on in my body. It's hard for me. And also as well, my emotional responses are pretty flat. It's like, I'm so happy. That's so funny. I'm so sad. It's like everything's kind of in that middle band, but often it'll just be something that will tip me over and suddenly we're off and racing and I'm having big feelings. They're coming out of nowhere. And that can be really scary, for other people to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah, and so much of our friendship, I've been trying to crack jokes and I didn't think I was funny for a really long time because you kept saying, oh my God, that's so funny.
Funny.
You wouldn't laugh. I mean, but so how do you kind of mix that with the interoception that we've talked about before as well? Because with the interoception, we don't often if you can't identify the feelings, but then you also aren't receiving the physical, red flags to say something's wrong, until you're at a 10. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. For us neurodivergent folk, the two are really closely linked. So it's kind of like alexithymia and lower interoception skills are, or abilities are two sides of the same coin, and that's kind of one part of the picture. The other part is what we call amygdala reactivity, and that is basically kind of our nervous system being wired more to identify threat and to notice things more, right? So, back in the day, right, really, really strong hunter abilities, right, all of that sort of stuff. But in the modern day environment, being wired for threat means that we tend to notice more and we tend to get activated quickly. And then the third component is what we call prefrontal cortex lags. And I'm not a big fan of calling anything a lag, but it just means that when we are then in a state where we're escalated, the prefrontal cortex, which is all the thinking, rational parts of our brain, all of that sort of stuff, is slower to catch it. So if I'm kind of to put those sort of things together and the experience that many of us have, and some things will be more true or less true, but it's kind of it can be harder for us to notice something's up in the first place, but we're more likely to be tripped up on a regular basis by our nervous system. So we're more likely for stuff to happen that sets off big feelings. It can be harder for us to interpret those big feelings until they're a 10 out of 10 and actually interact, intercede with them. And then on top of that, the parts of our brain that help us chill back down and, come back to the present moment are also a little bit slower to get to the party.
Yeah.
So it's kind of
explain
this
why
sort
you're
of
always
perfect
screaming at technology.
Yeah, exactly. I'm screaming at technology because the technology deserves it. But yeah, that's a really, really good, simple example, right? If you saw the rage that I exhibit towards the microphone or to my phone on a daily basis, not microphone, microwave, or my phone on a daily basis, right? You would think that's That's a lot. But again, it's for me, it's the frustration. It can't do what I want to do. And it just escalates and my brain goes straight into the path of, it's not going to work. I can't do the thing. I need to do the thing. There's realistic time pressures outside. All of this kind of happens. And then suddenly I'm shouting at a piece of technology that until recently has not been able to shout back.
I mean, like, talk to me about the external pressure, right? Because so much of what I've like, when I've hit that 10, when I've hit that 11, or, even 20, it's generally been from a mix of internal and external pressure of, if I don't do this, there's going to be this consequence, or until it just gets too much for me. And I'm exploding.
You blow your lid, right? Yeah. And it's such a good point, right? Because so often, like with kids, right, if they're having a tantrum, it's their way of saying, I'm not coping with what's happening, and I don't have the ways to communicate that, right? Like, I can't express that. I don't necessarily know what's going on. I know it's uncomfortable, and therefore I'm going to have these big emotional reactions. And as adults, it's the same thing. When we have these big emotional responses, it's often, particularly like when they're anger or their frustration or flooding, with big emotions and tears, right? It's our body saying our body's way of saying, ironically, it's too much, right? Like, I'm not able to deal with what's happening right now. And that's not just something in our heads. That's usually where there is a combination of the environment not being supportive for us, as well as, things internally escalating as well within our nervous systems and within our bodies. So red hot buttons for a lot of neurodivergent people are time, right? Like, time is really tricky for us to understand, to process. Exactly. It's just like, I have to get out the door in 3 minutes, and it's just like the sense of panic or pressure, that comes along with that, right? Time can be a big one. Complexity and choice and decisions, can also be another one. It might be certain people in the environment that are triggering for you. It might be certain values. Like for me, fairness is like like a lot of autistic people, fairness for me is like a massive driver. If that is a road, like we are often racing, right? Like it is not about the thing, it's about the principle behind it. So yeah, it's like working out in those environments, like what those triggers are for you, and then also being able to address that as well.
Yeah. So you're telling me that just because I magically turned the age of 18, I haven't sort of, picked up all of these amazing coping mechanisms and strategies through like osmosis.
Exactly. It's like, these are skills, people. It's skills, it's skills to learn, but it's also every human being on the planet has big feelings. Every single human being does. And it might be more as neurodivergent people that we have them for what seems to be like irrational reasons, right? Like, but it's actually, it might be our sensory needs are not being met. There might be some hidden labor or hidden load, some trigger that's causing it. So it might be less predictable when these things happen for us, or appear less predictable, but things happen for a reason. And it might also be that we get tripped up and we have them potentially more often, but every human being has big feelings.
Yeah. And I often find as well, and certainly in like some of the people that I've spoken to, it's not always about the thing. The most recent thing that's happened isn't actually necessarily the thing that's causing the big emotions. It's not causing the big explosion. It's actually a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of this, until basically the plate that you're holding is so heavy that you just have to drop it, because, you're literally... Or throw it. I love that. At someone, at a wall, but essentially it's not your plate to hold anymore because it's too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And the challenge is, like, obviously when we do have these big feelings, right, and it is difficult often to be around, but it's also really difficult to be in this body having those big feelings, right? And so, yeah, it's often people just say it's, you're too much to deal with, or that's too much, that's a lot. They maybe don't say anything at all. They might give you subtle signs of rejection. So over a period of time, you've learned that it's not okay to express your feelings. But the bad news is, peeps, is if you just don't express the feelings, you don't acknowledge them, they're not there. It's just like a pressure cooker. It just keeps building up and building up and building up. And the irony is you end up exploding bigger, but also as well, you end up doing a lot of damage to yourself along the way.
Yeah. I mean, some of the studies that I've read in the last few years really point towards, particularly women with essentially repressed rage issues.
Yeah.
And the rage itself is not the issue, it's the repression.
Yeah.
And so when you end up having this, ongoing series of pushing it down, screaming into the void, not being able to express it because, you're worried either about other people's reactions or responses, or you maybe don't feel safe. But it can actually culminate inside and turn into like actual physical health issues, whether it's, autoimmune disease or, you end up just getting really
inflammation.
Sick.
Yeah. Yeah, because your body's being flooded with these chemicals, which should be an in case of emergency break glass chemical combination, right? Designed to keep you alive. But with modern society and how our lives and worlds are built, instead of that maybe happening once a day or once a week, it's happening multiple and many, many times a day. And that, funnily enough, takes a toll on our bodies.
Yeah. It's funny how like emotions, they may sound like a like a concept, like an intangible concept, but they can physically manifest in your body. And paying attention to that and understanding, like, oof, I've got something under my shoulder blade at the moment. Like, I wonder what's going on there. But taking that time. So how would you kind of talk to somebody, or what advice would you give somebody who, has had a history of, not being able to get to that, pull the brake side of things before it's gotten too big? What happens if you're already at a 10, you haven't seen the red flags? How would you come down from that?
Yeah, so I guess if you're already escalated, and in that things where literally your body is saying this is too much, right? And you're letting out you're responding in a way to demonstrate it being too much for you to carry. If you're in that state of escalation, right, first thing I just look to do is rapid escalation, right? And for us, mindfulness looks a little bit different. Like, it often needs to be quite intentional. Like, if somebody just says to me, breathe, I'm like, why?
I am.
So I don't, so like doing things where it's like, might be like letting out a roar, or, like a lion's roar as you breathe, or it might be, setting a timer for 30 seconds, counting your breaths, and then halving that number and then halving it again, right? But something intentional, like physically changing your sensory environment, taking off your shoes, going outside in nature, having fresh breezes, whatever that is comforting and soothing to you. But also as well, you can use more rapid sort of rapid de-escalation strategies, things like, using ice cold water and stuff like that, to help you come back down and put that prefrontal cortex back online, right? To put online that part that's escalated. But if you find yourself being tripped up on a regular basis, and you find you're having these big feelings, right, there's a reason behind them, and it may not be apparent to other people, but taking that moment to look at what time of day are they happening? Is it certain people? What's the environment like? Like, what is actually going on here? And then, actually looking to change the environment, and actually looking to change the things around you. So it might be your sensory environment. It might be some of the pressures that you're carrying, or emotional load, cognitive load, time pressures, looking to do things to actually systemize your environment around you so that your environment is less hostile.
Yeah.
And that you're actually not being pushed to that point of having big emotions on a regular basis.
Yeah. And you've mentioned also the How We Feel app as well, which is it's a free app, and I've set up 2 reminders, so once in the morning and once in the evening. That's just, it comes up and it's just like, how are you feeling? Yeah. And going in and being able to go, okay, well, I'm feeling deeply upset at the moment, or I'm feeling like low mood, good vibes. Like it's just
it
a
just
nice
gives
way.
You data.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gives you data and helps build that emotional literacy. Yeah, it's
particularly for people with ADHD who may not remember, why
that the app
I
exists.
felt this way.
Yeah, exactly. Or even that, the app exists and you're meant to log your emotions. Yeah, but no, it's a really good one. But collecting that data, like, and working out where that is, or working it through with somebody. So it's de-escalate, it's repair if you need to, and then it's looking fundamentally at what's actually going on in your environment to cause these feelings to happen on a regular basis. Yeah.
That repair function is so critical as well, because where somebody has seen or potentially even taken the brunt of these big emotions, it's really important to be able to sit down and help them understand what was going on inside for you, and also get there and be able to sit with the consequences of just like, oh yeah, well, I felt really uncomfortable, or, that was too much for me, and just being okay with that. But then, as you say, repairing and being able to look at, well, how can I de-escalate this in the future?
Yeah.
Or maybe, how can I find a constructive way to scream into the void, or go to a break room, or, any number of those things. So I think that is probably a really great place to end the episode. Yeah. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please like and subscribe for more. And as always, stay spicy.
Stay spicy.
You're listening to the Neurospice and Life podcast
with Hannah and Freya, besties, brains, and more.
If you've enjoyed listening, follow us on YouTube or your favourite podcast app and share it with someone else who knows the sting of a sticky label.
We'll see you next time. Until then, stay spicy, stay wonderful.